So logging in and logging out seem to work really well. I can come up here to my login screen and log in as you@there.com with the password. And if I log in, everything works properly. So I have my login changed to a logout and life seems to be good. But the problem with this right now is if I go back to my application, the front end, and I make any change, something that will cause this to recompile. So I hit return and I click down here and it recompiles, okay? Now when I go back to my web browser and I reload this page, I'm no longer logged in. It forgot all about me. And that makes sense because when the application stops, everything we have in that store.js, the token is the only thing in there right now, that goes away. And we probably want to fix that. And we're going to do that by going back to the login component. So I'll go back here. And at the bottom of this, we're actually going to save information to a cookie. And then we'll go back and modify another component. Whenever we come back to this site, we'll check for the existence of that cookie. And if it exists and hasn't expired, we'll automatically log the user in. And that's really simple. So what I'm going to do is look at the fetch statement in this part, this last then clause, where we store the value of the token in store.token. So before we go to router push, we'll just create a cookie. So we'll say save info to cookie. And while we're at it, I'm actually going to change the kind of payload we get back from the backend. Right now, we just get basic information and a cookie. And I want to store some user information, maybe first name, ID, last name, and email address. So we may as well make those changes right now, and we'll go back and modify the backend later on. So first of all, let's get a date. I'll say let date equal new date. Just a standard JavaScript date object. And then I'll set the number of days before this cookie expires. So I'll say let exp days equal 1. I'm going to make the cookie last for 1 day, okay? And now I'll call date, that variable I just declared on line 84, dot set time, and I'll make that equal to the current date and time, date.getTime, plus, and then I'll use the variable exp days, which is set to 1, times 24 hours, times 60 minutes, times 60 seconds, times 1, 1, 2, 3. And that will get me exactly what I'm looking for, okay? Let me put a space in there. So now I have the date set to what I want it to be, 1 day in the future. Now I'll declare a constant that I'll call expires. And this will go into the cookie. That's going to be equal to the string expires equal plus the value of date dot to UTC string. Okay? Let's scroll up a bit and give ourselves some room. Now we'll set the cookie. And that's as simple as saying document dot cookie equals, and it's a string, and I'm going to call mine underscore site underscore data, okay? Equals, and then I need to put a body in there, and we'll come back to that in a minute, okay? So I'll put a plus like this, and we're going to put a JSON file in there. We're going to store a small JSON file in a cookie, but we'll write that in a minute, okay? Plus expires, plus, and then a semicolon to end it, and then a space, and the path equals slash, the entire website. Same site attribute is going to be set to strict. Okay, we don't want this to be sent along with any third-party cookies, and we'll make it a secure cookie, like that. Now the part we want to fill it right here, and I'm going to put a semicolon in so I don't forget. The part we want to put here is, of course, the important part, the part that has information about our token and our user and whatever else. Now, of course, the part that we want right here, this, you might think is response.data, but it's not. We can't just use that. That won't put it in the right format. Instead, we want to make this a JSON file. So JSON.stringify response.data, okay? Now, as I said, we're going to modify the backend in a moment to actually get more information than we're currently getting. So let's go up here and make a change to this store.token part, okay? what I'm going to do is go over to the store.js, and I'm going to add something in here. And all I'm going to add is user, which will just be an empty object. Okay? So now I have a place to store user information. So back to login.view, let's assume we're going to get the token as we do right now, and we're also going to get a user object. And that means I can come up here after I save the token and say store.user is going to be equal to, in curly brackets, ID, and that will be response.data. Not token. I'm going to also put a user object in there. It doesn't exist yet, but it will soon, .id. And then first name will be equal to response.data.user .first_name. And I'll duplicate that and make this last name. And make this last name. And finally, email address. And that will just be email, because I might need that somewhere in the application. Email, like that. Okay? So with those few lines of JavaScript, now we have a means of storing a cookie and checking for the existence of that cookie the next time the user comes to the website. And of course, the logical place to do that is in app.view. So let's go over to app.view, and let's add a lifecycle hook. And the one I'm going to use is before mount. Okay? And what we'll do here is check for a cookie. Okay? So how does one check for a cookie? Well, this is one of the irritating things about JavaScript, is we actually have to get all of the document cookies and loop through them until we find the one that we're looking for. Unfortunately, that's pretty easy. So let's go back up here after the import statements and before the export statement and declare a constant, which I'll call getCookie. And that's going to be equal to, we're going to use name and then an arrow function. Okay, so the parameter is name, and we'll return document.cookie.split, and we're going to split on a semicolon and a space. Then we'll use the JavaScript function reduce, and then in parentheses, R and V will be the two things I'm looking for, okay? And then another arrow function, and then in curly brackets, we'll declare a constant. I have too many brackets here. Fix that. And put this one down here where it belongs. So inside that return statement, I'm going to declare a constant, parts, which is equal to v.split. And we're splitting on the equal sign. Then we'll return parts 0, the first index, is exactly equal to the parameter name that we get as a call to this function. And then a question mark, decode URI component, parts index 2, which is position, index 1, which is position 2, colon R. Semicolon, then our curly bracket to close that off, or an empty string. So if we can't find a cookie with that name, we return an empty string. So there's a constant that's actually a function, and this will read through the cookies, find a cookie with that name if it can, and return the appropriate value. So down here in before mount, I can now declare a variable, let data, I want to call it data because that's what's in the cookie, equal to, and I'll call getCookie. And I'll pass it the name that cookie should have, _site_data. And if that value, data, is not exactly equal to an empty string, then we found the cookie. Okay? So we have a cookie named _site_data, so let's read its value, and I'll read it into a value called cookie data. So let cookie data, that's a new variable, equal to JSON, because we were storing JSON in there, we'll parse it, and what we're parsing, of course, is data, that value we got back. So now I have it in a format I can use it. So now, update store. And that's just a matter of saying store.token is equal to cookie data dot token. And I'm also going to assume that the user information is in there, and we'll add that in the next lecture. So I can say store.user is now equal to a JavaScript object, and the first value is ID, and that will be in cookie data. Cookie data, and I'm going to assume it's going to be in a field called user.id. And let's duplicate that and scroll up a bit. We'll have first name, and duplicate that, and have last name, and duplicate that, and make this one email, and then put the correct values in there. This becomes email, this becomes last name, and this becomes first name. Okay, so once we go and make some changes to the back end and include the user information in that JavaScript payload to the login function, this should work. So in the next lecture, we'll get started making the changes in the back end.